and that is the fact that we are in this loose monetary policy environment. We've got low rates. We've got the buying of bonds and other assets here. We obviously know what that has done. And by the way, not just right now, but over the past decade or so, to the wealth of the wealthiest Americans. So you have that situation on one hand. And on the other hand, you have massive amounts of stimulus and spending that have both taken place with more and looking to be proposed more of right now with a ballooning deficit. So it almost seems like interest rates need to stay low to help with that deficit, but that in turn could continue to exacerbate this issue. What's the administration to do?
So I think it's hard for the administration to directly address the wealth gap, but I do think they can address the income gap, and obviously income and wealth are related. And I think the first thing we got to remember is that a high-pressure labor market probably helps lower-income households the most. Mm-hmm. So this was an idea that now Treasury Secretary, or soon-to-be Treasury Secretary Yellen was a big advocate of. And so if we can really get unemployment rates back down below 5% and below 4%, that's going to help the lower-income households the most, and over time that will help narrow the wealth gap. And how do you do that? I think keeping monetary policy loose is one half of this kind of two-legged stool, and the other obviously is fiscal support, which we got a fillip of in December, and presumably we'll get some more of here in the first quarter. So I think that's in my opinion, the most important way to get for the administration to really think about addressing not necessarily the wealth gap, but the income gap. And over time, the two, of course, are strongly related.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this note, this recent note from you, where you talk about vaccine optimism, arguing for more PPP. What do you mean by that?
So, the point of the PPP program is to keep viable businesses afloat until we get back to normalcy, right? So if there were no vaccine and we thought the coronavirus were going to be endemic for quarters and years to come, PPP would be throwing good money after bad at business models, businesses whose models are no longer viable. But if we think that, come the summertime, these businesses can reopen, then it does make a lot of sense to keep those afloat for the next few months until we can get back to normalcy. So I think the fact that there's actually light at the end of the tunnel doesn't mean we should pull back on some forms of stimulus, but actually strengthens the case for keeping these businesses afloat until we get to that end of the tunnel.
Hey, Mike, it's Dom. One of the things that we focus on a lot here is this notion that the employment picture is going to be such a key to what's going to happen with the U.S. economy and getting back on track here. Are there certain places within your universe, your models, that are more important than others? Is there an industry group? Is there a certain set of jobs that need to be rectified in order to be that linchpin that gets the kind of economy back on track?
Well, I think this gets back to the initial question about the wealth and income gap, which is where we still see job shortfalls relative to this time last year is overwhelmingly in lower paid service industries, things like hospitality and restaurants and so forth. And that's also tends to be lower educated and lower paid jobs. And presumably to get back to some sense of normalcy, not only for an economy, but for society, those jobs are going to need to come back. Obviously, it's hard to do that as long as the pandemic is making it difficult to engage in those kind of activities, which strengthens the case for keeping support for those households until we get back to that time. Hopefully that's in the summer. And I would also add that one of the other areas where the labor market looks damaged is on the supply side, which is to say labor force participation is still rather subdued relative to what it was before the pandemic. And probably a good part of that is parents who have to stay at home to help with their kids' schooling, homeschooling. So if we can normalize the school situation, that will also help to normalize the labor supply situation.
Yeah.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.